Good morning.
Steve, we're not supposed to start the broadcast yet, so let me just put us on mute in case anyone joins for a second.
Our planify content is prepackaged solution which helps with your enterprise planning, analytics, and consolidations. Our content is based on a technology stack, utilize the same technology stack utilized by thousands of large customers today for mission business planning and performance management. We understand that content and planning can differ by industry and companies may have specific requirements, but we also know from our experience that implementing planning solutions and especially SAP Analytics Cloud that there are several common planning and reporting features used across industries and companies. We've spent over 5,000 hours building out these packages based on leading practices, which could be leveraged as an out-of-the-box solution or as a starting point to build on your specific business requirements. Instead of having to build dashboards and applications from scratch, we give you a great starting point where you can have prepackaged solutions and allow you to deploy these in weeks, accelerating project deployment and time to value. But let's really get to, that's who we are, but let's really get to why we're here today. The new measure model. Many features come into the new measure model over the classic account model, but I'm going to just focus on a few differences here. The first and most important, obviously, is its name, the measure. And by taking all of the facts out of another dimension, say account, and putting them into measure, we now have another set of parameters that we can use and another dimension, if you will, that we can use to create functionality and drive value and also drive some very, very different opportunities in terms of solutions. The measures can be used for different types, currencies, units, percentage, whatever. And the facts kept here are separate from these other dimensions. So now you have the ability to use sort of another, I hate to use the same word dimension, but it's another dimension into your solution. We also have not only booked measures, but conversion and calculated measures, and those provide new and flexible ways to transform and visualize data throughout the stories. But most importantly, in many cases, there's no reason for a data action to transform or convert your data because it's always there on the fly in the model using these built-in measures. For example, we can have year-to-date and comparison measures, and those can be created and used anywhere in a story or a chart or a table. The FX measures leverage the conversion engine that's built into SAP via the rate tables. And again, you then get your financial currency translation on the fly. Lastly, the new measure and the new model, and this is brand new as of this latest update, I believe, provides flexible dates that allow for weekly reporting so we can get 445 calendars automatically. You can see that there's a lot of advantages over the old model, and many of these can be exploited pretty easily. And you'll see that even the migration is very simple. So SAP has provided us with a little button, and it's very useful if you want to use the migration methodology of getting to the new model. You can, of course, always build a new model yourself, but this one actually helps you get to a beginning place with your new model. But a couple of caveats. The model needs to be emptied of all related objects, which I'll show in a few minutes. Currency must be turned off, and this model will be overwritten. So you'll have to make a copy before you start. Otherwise, you're going to lose everything that you've already built, which is probably not what you want to do. Once you've done your conversion into the new model, your migration, then you've got some adjustments to do to get the data exactly where you want to see it. But one big caveat, and this is clear in both cases, all existing stories, widgets, filters, data actions, whatever you've created must be rewritten because now you've got a totally new set of dimensions to deal with. Or you can just build a new model. We all know how to do that. The question is, which is the easiest way to go? So it will depend, and you'll see as we go through this, which way might be better for your particular situation, and it may not be the same for every situation in your book. So I'm going to settle on a couple of ideas here. One is the model preference settings. It's really important that you go through all of them and make sure you've got them exactly set the way you want to once you've done your conversion. Some of them can't be changed, so that's important to realize. The dates and some of the conversions on the currencies, the number of decimals and so forth, once those are set, those are set. You'll want to review some dimensions, version for sure, to make sure that the rates and categories of those rates are selected properly. You'll have to enhance your currency dimension and enable currency in that model, and make sure that the dimension for currency conversion, which usually would come from organization entity, for example, it might be a different entity or a different set of members that you'll want to use for currency conversion, but each of the leaf members in that dimension has to have a currency associated with it. So with the migrate, you'll use your existing dimensions and modify those dimensions as you go. Primarily, that's going to be around currency, as we mentioned. The new model, you'll have to start over and bring over all your private dimensions, create versions, copy the data. So that's going to be some bit of work. But again, both of these approaches will entail a bit of work. In terms of measures, you're going to be creating new measures in both situations. One is in the migrate button, you're going to create your new measures from the facts that you already have, which I'll demonstrate shortly. And in the new model, you'll create the new measures and then copy into those new measures. The data can be brought across in the migrate version into the signed data measure we'll show. But you'll want to create your local currency and USD measures, making sure to create the right numbers of decimals. In most cases, probably will be 2. And again, for the new model, you'll create a big copy data action, which will bring everything in. So let me show you how the signed data will work. When you do your migration, all of your data will now end up in a new measure called signed data. That measure will contain both USD and LC currencies in the case of the model that we're using here. But I really want to be able to see that LC by currency. So what I'm going to do is create a data action which will move copy the data from signed data to my new USD and local currency measures. And the USD will be copied obviously into the USD measure, and the local currency will be copied into the local currency measure. But the difference there is we're going to add to our currency dimension each of the currencies. So in this case, Canadian dollars. And then we'll have all of our currencies in local currency, but with a denomination by the dimension in currency, by that member of the currency. For USD, it's a little simpler because it's all the same. USD is local currency and USD is the same value. So you're really moving the USD into both of those measures. So without further ado, let's skip the PowerPoints and get to something more interesting, which is actually looking into the system. I'm going to show the models at various stages of conversion as we go through the migration. Then we'll look at some measures that we've created in this model, and then a couple of stories that give you an idea about how you can leverage the new measures in different ways in the models. So here we have a typical model. This model has an account base, has versions, and it's got some related objects. So this is the beginning point that we're going to want to use, but we'll want to copy it. And when we copy it to a different model, we'll copy exactly the same model, but all the related objects will go away. We can then clear off currency and make sure that our settings are correct. And let's see, currency is turned off. And now we'll be able to see that this button is engaged. If I come over here and I try to create this migrate, the model's already used. I can't use it. It's grayed out. If I come over here, I'm able to migrate. Make sure that you know this cannot be undone. Once you click that button, this copy of the model will now be the new model. There's no going back, and it will make that migration for you, but you can't go back and get to this model again. Once you click that button, here's what it's going to look like. Again, still no related objects, but we now have a new measure. The new measure is signed data. I see some people having trouble seeing. Everybody see now? Seems to be some connectivity issue. All of the other dimensions remain the same, but we have this signed data measure. There's nothing magical about this signed data measure. It's just blank. All of this is the same. It's shown as currency fixed data, fixed in USD, but it's all mishmashed in here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some measures. And once I do that, I'm going to create two booked measures. These are booked measures. And you'll see that the USD has a fixed currency type of USD. Local currency is getting its currency from the report currency dimension. And you'll see that the name and the decimal places are grayed out, which means you can't change those anymore. So before you finish populating this model, you'll want to make sure that those are set the way you want them to be. But that's really just the beginning, because we have to come over here to report currency and make sure that we have all the currencies that we're going to need in our model, and they have a currency assigned to them. So we have a new property here, a system property called currency, and we assign the currency over here in that property. We're also going to come down to organization, turn on that currency property, and make sure that all of the leaf members of our entities have currencies. But again, we're just at the beginning of measures. So in this model, we've created some conversion measures. Conversion measures work in the background with the embedded currency engine. And we can see here our converted currency is USD converted. Where does it come from? It comes from our booked local currency measure. It's going to end up fixed into USD based on the booking date of the story or the chart or the table that we're looking at on a dynamic category. We could choose any category, a specific category, any of the budget or planning categories based on our currency table. These all have to will live in our currency table. Local currency converted, of course, is the other way around. It's coming from USD, and again, relying on the reporting currency. But we can also do something a little different. So if we wanted to look at our dollars based on last month's exchange rates, we can choose our local currency measure, bring it to US dollars based on a flexible reporting date. So we want to look at booking date -1 month or year, for example, or a specific date. Let's say you wanted to look at everything based on last year end date. And again, the same thing with the different categories. So that gets us one interesting measure that we can use in our reporting. But you see here we've got a lot of different calculations. These calculations use the typical formulas that we know and love within the stories of SAC, but we can do some magical things with them. So for example, if we wanted to look at year to date, we could create a calculation here using the iterate formula, which brings us the year to date amounts. Same thing with quarter to date, somewhat a little different formula. Or we can look at, let's say, prior month, USD prior month. We can use a lookup formula and get the prior month. And what that does is it brings the value from some other place, either another version or another time, into the story that we're working on based on the parameters of that story. I think that's about what we wanted to show here. Okay, so let's get to some stories. In this case, I've shown the comparison between 2 months. I've got that measure that we looked at before, which was prior month. And I used that to come up with this versus prior month measure, which we can look at back here, versus prior month, USD versus prior month. Right, I just took one less the other. So I calculated the prior month, this month versus last month, and bam, it's there. And the same thing with the variance. We've got that calculated in the model, and we can display it in any story. Now, rather than having to build these two calculations in each story, I can use them anywhere in any story or chart, and I don't have to recalculate them. So this whole chart took less than 10 minutes to put together because I didn't have to build anything. That makes it very flexible, and it brings it back to you in any place that you look on, in any story that you create. Similarly, we created a year-to-date and quarter-to-date measure. And you can see how those will add up. You've got 110 million here for the year. And then we've got a quarter-to-date total, which is adding up each of the quarters. And the year-to-date, the last number in December comes out to 110. So each of these is the month prior. You can see it adds up pretty quickly. But the point is, it's always available, and you've got what you need to go ahead and build any kind of story or chart that you want. The last piece that I wanted to show is how you might want to use some foreign currency exposure and see what the change in your financials are based on, say, in this case, last month's rate. So using these measures, which are all in my model, I'm just showing these here for examples. We want to compare 2 months of Canadian dollars. So I'm going to compare current USD versus prior USD. And then I want to compare it calculated at the last month. So that's the prior month, that's the USD. Here's my local currency. I'm going to calculate my actual, my 2726 at last year's rate, last month's rate, and I can take the difference and see that the FX impact is $20,000. Similarly, I can be net of my FX impact by taking the difference between the prior month and the FX difference and seeing that the net of these three comes out to 126,000. So the net difference net of FX from the prior month. So that's the change without any FX impacts. Very flexible. You have a lot of opportunities here for different kinds of comparisons, different ways to use these different measures in your stories. And because of the flexibility of the calculations and what you can bring in terms of formulas, lookups, in this case, iterates, just differences, you've got a lot of different opportunities for different kinds of calculations, which can drive your results and drive your analytics. So let's talk about some of the key differences with the new model versus the old model. By having the facts in a specific, essentially dimension using measure for fact storage, you're freeing up the way the system stores the data. So that really does streamline your data storage, might reduce, for sure will reduce the facts that you have in your stories on your model, and make things more efficient as you go through. Measures are available on the fly for all the booked conversion and calculated measures that we saw. Most importantly, your currency conversion is available without any data action. So let's say you're in a planning environment, Joe over here puts in some numbers and you want to see what the results are. You don't have to run a data action to see what the FX impact is going to be, see what the real number is going to be in dollars. It all comes out automatically the next time you do an update to the screen. So that's very, very valuable, especially in a planning situation where you've got people inputting data across a broad geography or a broad number of business units. The different measure types that we have really do facilitate keeping track of FTEs, percentages, tax rates, things like that are very easily kept separate and booked in a way that you can use them easily in your data actions. The separate currency table in the background allows you to manage rates, rate version, and rate types. This can be populated in a variety of ways, either just cut and paste, or it can be fed from an outside system. And there's a couple of improvements coming to that rate table pretty soon, which I think will make it a lot more useful in terms of being able to build stories from it. But in the meantime, you can leverage that table, have different currency types, average, closing, obviously for income statement and balance sheet, but also different budget rates, planning rates, forecast rates. You might have a rolling forecast with 12 different rates for the year, for example. And that really lets you make a lot of comparisons versus different scenarios that might come up. Having currency as a separate dimension also makes it easier in terms of your reporting. You can look at things by currency across different company codes, and you can actually plan in those currencies, which is not possible in the account model that we have now. Dimensions can be linked to a currency based on need. So in one job that we did, we had two different ways of converting the currencies. One was based on what they call site, and the other one was based on an entity. So we were able to create a measure based on a conversion based on site currency as well as the entity's currency. And that gave them some planning flexibility that they don't have today in some of their other systems. And importantly, we can leverage those weekly time periods. For example, 445, a lot of companies choose a weekly time frame, retail obviously, as well as some major companies using 445 to make sure that they have the same number of days in each quarter. So what do you do next? Well, for a start, don't ever start another model with the old model. All your new projects should be based on the new model, the measures, which give you this flexibility of the functionality in the measures. First of all of SAP's development is going to be in the new model. And that's where all the new features are going to be coming. So that's what we should be using. The new model, the optimized design, all of these elements are getting the new developments. So you want to make sure that you future-proof a little bit what you're doing by always building a new project in the new model. Now, migrate versus build, I've personally gone back and forth on this over the last few weeks as we've put this together. I think it really depends on your scenario. What I was really thinking at the beginning, it was a toss-up. Then I leaned that it was really much better to use the migrate, and now I'm back to a toss-up. And it's going to be based on whether or not you have maybe a lot of stories that you need to convert and data actions, which would be easier to convert. I don't know. It depends on how much data you have. How much data do you have to copy over? Where do you bring it from? How many dimensions do you have to create? If they're private dimensions, how do you bring those over? So those are kind of things that you want to consider as you're going forward. But the bottom line really is always use the new model. Make sure that you've got the caveats understood in terms of what you have to turn off, what you have to turn on, when you do it, what the steps are, and that you can do that conversion from signed data to the two new measures properly. Validate once you've got the new model versus your old model so that you're ending up with the same results. And I think once you find that you've gotten used to the new model a little bit, that's going to be your go-to solution. And you'll find that you've got a lot more opportunities in creating meaningful stories, meaningful analytics, and leverage the new model for all of your planning scenarios. Okay, unless there are any other questions, I would thank you for your time. And hopefully this will give you at least a little bit of an introduction into the new model. And if you want more information, you can of course go to our website, look at our YouTubes. This will be out on YouTube in a couple of days. Contact us either through the main contact at Simplify Solutions email or contact me directly if you like. Thank you very much for your time. John, did we
Thanks,
have any
Stephen, for a
questions?
great session. And like Stephen said, you can check our YouTube page. This will be out there in the next 24 hours if this is helpful to you internally. And if we can certainly assist you on your journey, don't hesitate to reach out. If you have any additional questions, feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap up here in just a second. Okay, thank you. Well, appreciate you all joining. For the few questions remaining, we'll go ahead and answer in the chat, or we can reach out to you directly, and have a great day.